just to recap the agenda, we're going to have a brief panel discussion right now. So I'll let our presenters sit back in their chairs and cross their legs. And then after that, we'll have a demo. So hopefully everyone stays around for the actual demonstration. So Eddie, Sean, Animesh, we have some questions that were entered. I would also ask everyone on the call, if you do have questions, general or for a specific presenter, please enter them in the chat. So we have a few here. I'd like to, start with Eddie. The first one, what are the top benefits your customers are seeing deploying Kubernetes?
Yeah, it's a great question, Kevin. I think, the fact that we now have kind of like a single API method to kind of normalize this idea of DevOps, right? Of being able to not only develop my applications and deploy them in a quick and easy fashion, and our operators all kind of speak the same language and all understand the same process, really helps to streamline the innovation and the pace at which organizations, once they do have it down right, can bring new products and new features to bear. Google's built on this concept, this idea that when we have to release new features, we have to release updates or fix bugs. We have this capability to do it at scale and at speed when it's necessary, right? We no longer are the days of having to wait for Sunday night, an outage window to do an update on my service and then cross my fingers that everything works. And it's really about the power of containers, the power of Kubernetes being an orchestrator for that. And I hope that at some point Kubernetes becomes boring and it's just underneath everything. And really it's about delivering the applications on top at scale and at speed. Great.
Thanks, Eddie. Sean, would you like to comment?
Sure. Yeah, I second what Eddie said about just the speed at which you can issue application patches or upgrades, deploy new applications. A lot of it, for when we talk to customers, and the conversation is a little more developer focused than infrastructure focused. There's like clearly Kubernetes is evolving at this crazy pace. You've got 4 major releases a year. Who knows how that's going to play out in the future? But I will say this, one thing that I've noticed across the industry and all the practitioners that I've spoken with is that what an incredible community there is around Kubernetes. It spans the globe. I mean, you have some of the most amazing technical minds, people that are so well versed in areas like networking, storage, security, monitoring, and so that I think is a huge asset for not only developers but for infrastructure folks as well. I mean, just the size and the value of the community that translates to big momentum in getting stuff done with Kubernetes.
Great, thanks, Sean. Animesh? Oh, Animesh, I think you're on mute.
So sorry about that. So going third after Eddie and Sean, I'm definitely out of points. But one thing that stands out is that Kubernetes actually enables the secular connected cloud, right? You can run Kubernetes anywhere, on-premises, not only Nutanix. You can run anything on on-premises, anywhere on on-premises and edge. And that is that is something that connects. That is what builds the platform for ubiquitous workload mobility, whether it is VM or containers. And I think that's what customers need, because cloud is an ecosystem. Cloud is a utility. How do you consume cloud in a secular manner is what makes enterprises successful, right? What makes our customers successful and what makes their cloud journey successful. And I think Kubernetes is the backbone of that, right? So that is one of the things that I like about, which I feel our customers would then definitely benefit from Kubernetes.
Great, thanks, Animesh. So our next question, what challenges do customers run into when building their own Kubernetes environments on Prem? So maybe we'll keep the same order if you don't mind. So Eddie, would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, sure. it's a lot of moving parts. Not everyone has, specializes in distributed computing and understanding all of those components that kind of work together, and then just the day two operations of it. It's not just the on-prem, but it's just anywhere if you try to roll out your own Kubernetes. One of the, I think personally, and I'm going to ask an audience member who I saw come in, I think the biggest challenge that most customers face and why they're being forced to go on premises is data gravity. And if Jacob from Ioneer can kind of just pitch in a little bit, because I think his solution really kind of lends itself towards that data gravity problem.
Yeah, thanks, Eddie. Hi, my name is Jacob. I'm with Ioneer. I'm the CEO of Ioneer. Great conversation about how Kubernetes allows you to build consistent IT. I think Animesh used about secular IT. I think that's very, very true. Kubernetes basically solves the problem for the application containers, right? And the thing that is left out is what to do with the persistent data. And enterprise applications have persistent data. And so what we have done is we've built a platform. It's a software-defined platform, but the unique value proposition is we can move any persistent volume between any two Kubernetes clusters, and it doesn't matter how far they are, in less than 40 seconds, right? And so if you think of what that means, containers in this new world, in this new Kubernetes everywhere world, brings you mobility of the application, and we're completing the picture by actually providing the same capability for the persistent volumes that are associated with your application containers.
Thanks, Jacob. And there'll be a demo towards the end of my demo. I'm going to have someone come in, and Barak will be able to do a quick demo of Ioneer as well as part of that process. So, great.
Sounds great. Thanks, Jacob and Eddie. Sean, would you like to comment?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll continue on, the notion that Eddie brought up about all these moving parts, and more specifically, just the span of what you have to address. And again, I'm kind of looking at this from, building the infrastructure in your own data center, from that standpoint. So the biggest challenges typically are, how do I configure persistent storage? As Jacob was talking about, persisting data in an environment where you have all of these ephemeral elements, and containers that can just kind of disappear and be spun up again. That tends to be a challenge. I mean, it's somewhat deceiving in that, when you look at compute and CPU and memory, you have the simple declarative model in Kubernetes as to what you want to carve out for your application. But things get a little more complicated when it comes to storage, with networking, security. And security obviously is a huge challenge on its own, regardless of the type of infrastructure and applications you're trying to secure. But in many cases, you have to look at that very differently. Most traditional firewalls will not see container-to-container network activity, and so I think in a lot of ways it requires a rethinking of all of these really important areas in the data center.
That's great. Thanks, Sean. And Mesh, I'll pass it over to you.
Yep, sure. Just to add a few more points. Basically, one of the challenges that we see is so many versions of Kubernetes out there. It's about which brand, what credibility is there. So one of the things we help customers narrow down is, if you take the flexibility of Nutanix in the on-premises space and the flexibility and feature set of Anthos, that is the epitome of brand equity, right? So that is the epitome of credibility. So zero down on your which path to go. And once you do that, the next important step is how do you operationalize it, right? I mean, you have VMs, you have done something for the VM world, now you have to do everything for the Kubernetes world. You need to, he spoke about security, Sean spoke about security between containers. How do you have fixed the security between VMs? Now you need to fix the security between containers. So whatever you did in the VM space over 10 years, you need to now replicate that in the container space over 10 years. You don't have enough time because your competition is 2 steps ahead of you always. And so that is where you need to choose an inventive integrator who can help you reap these things from day one. So instead of going it yourself, going through a protracted skills transformation, try to use a blend of skills transformation plus a partner ecosystem to get to your deployment faster.
Sounds great. Thanks, Animesh. I want to remind the attendees too, if you have further questions on these topics, please add them to the chat. So the next question for Eddie, what's typically involved in a migration from traditional architecture to Kubernetes?
Great question, and it's one of those things that is really what it comes down to, the brass taxes, right? I have traditional monolithic, potentially applications. I want to get into this container world. I want to get all these benefits. There's a process. We referenced the 6 R's a couple of times: refactor, rehost, rehome. There's a whole concept and idea of what do I do with these applications and how do I get them from point A to point B? And I think one of the things that you'll see is I'm going to demonstrate one of the solutions that Anthos brings is something called Migrate for Anthos, which is a kind of solution that we built off of our Migrate for VMs, for Kubernetes engine, and now taking this idea of looking at a Linux workload or a Windows workload and being able to identify what that workload is, its dependencies, and then containerize it as a system container, as like a whole container that runs that system, and then be able to get you into this new world of running things in an orchestrated, distributed fashion, really helps accelerate. And that's what customers are looking for. How do I accelerate that move? And then give me time to rebuild or refactor or identify those applications that I might need to retire and find newer cloud native versions of those applications. I think the main thing is, as an organization, you have to double down on some hard bets. You have to say container native is the way we're going to go from now on in the future. And all decisions made have to be on that premise. Number 2 is we have to design and develop at scale for container-based workloads in a cloud-native fashion. 12factor.net, great website to look at as if you're a developer or if you're an own development shop, and get your developers in the mindset of building code that works well in a distributed fashion, because the biggest thing I've seen is code that just will not work in a distributed fashion because of dependencies or just things that weren't looked at. And then you have to architect all these weird things on top of it to fix. So think of cloud native. What are those top philosophy, those 12 core tenets of developing for cloud native, and double down and say everything has to be cloud native going forward. And then that's where you can start your journey, and then look back as necessary when you need to.
Thanks, Eddie. Sean? Sean, I think you're on mute.
Yeah. Sure.
So I was going to say, I think that pretty much covers it. Not much I can add to that one.
Okay, great. Animesh, do you have the opportunity to comment?
Yeah, so see, on Anthos Migrate, I think Eddie covered most of all of it actually. The only one angle that I wanted to talk about is, some customers ask us, do I go to cloud native as one shot, monolithic to cloud native? Is it a one shot journey, or can I use a staging environment? Because some customers, because of the complexity of the things that they have mainframe, they have AS400, they have Unix flavors. For them, the time spent to go to all this 6-7 hours cycle and a refactoring, it takes a certain amount of time. So they said, is it a one-shot journey to make cloud native, or can I have a staging environment? Can I do a one hop before I go cloud native? So for those situations, and this could be very similar, this could be a scenario where customer has a data center that he needs to vacate by December of this year. They are sitting in June of this year, and then the question arises, what do I do? So in those scenarios, we can do a quick, get a Nutanix cluster on Prem in a consumption-based financing model, get in your containerize your monolithic applications. You have not yet gone cloud native, just containerize it using Anthos Migrate. And then you can take away all your legacy 3-tier infrastructure. The VMware hypervisors don't need to pay for any VTAX. Come on to the Nutanix infrastructure, software define everything, run your containers, and then you have now time to go into the cloud native model. So it's a one-hop approach. You can go to cloud native, like Eddie said, that is the best. Most containers born in the cloud organizations or units that have a separate digital organization can go do that. But organizations that are slightly legacy in terms of some of the banking, insurance verticals, healthcare verticals, for them, I think a one-hop option also works. And Anthos and Nutanix lets you do that. One hop to containerize and the next hop to go cloud native.